All right, I'm going to pull us back a little bit from the wonderful text
This was great.
door that I opened.
Not typical of
oh my goodness, so much, I wish my husband was here.
It's like overhearing geeky theology.
I know, it's fantastic. And I want to step back a little bit in some of the practicalities. In all traditions, head covering is a part. What does that mean? Why is there head covering in the various forms that it exists within each of the religions, for men and for women? And is it only for at times of worship, throughout the culture? What is the role of head covering?
Oh, I think Christianity, it is absolutely about humility before God. No question. I mean, how many of you grew up, I grew up Catholic, and I definitely saw my grandmother cover her head when we went to church. No question. You would not go into a church without a scarf, or they kind of look like doilies. I don't know, whatever those were. But certainly out of humility. For being in God's presence.
Isn't it ironic, the difference between how a Muslim woman who covers her head is perceived and a nun? That has nothing to do with the media. That has nothing to do with conditioning or engineering. So look, here's the thing. In our tradition, and Muslims loved being asked about their faith and not told about their faith. Like, usually here's how an interfaith dialogue for me usually is this: walking out of Walmart, you guys, and then it's gone, you know? And it's like, okay, well, we could have had an exchange.
That's called interfaith monologue.
I have those like 6 times a week. There are Muslim women that are here today that cover their heads. Ask a Muslim woman how she feels about her head covering, and if anyone forced it upon her, or if it was a choice that she made at some point in her life as a means of devotion and humility before God. And I guarantee you that you'll be surprised by the answer. So and I'm actually inviting you, all the sisters, I see a few sisters here, you're good with being asked about your hijab and the story of your hijab. Okay, good, you're all good with that. So you may ask them that question, don't ask me that question, and ask those sisters, because when they decided to cover their heads and why they decided to cover their heads. It is in this America, in 2018, hats off, literally, to the Muslim women in this country that insist on their Americanness and insist on their identity, because what they are doing is an act of resistance to bigotry, because they're insisting that there is no... That is an insistence that, no, I will be an accomplished woman, and whatever that accomplishment looks like, and I will insist on my religious identity. And it is just as oppressive to force a woman to take her head covering off than to force her to put it on. So when you see France and you see a woman on the beach, you know, who's wearing the burkini, God forbid a woman on the beach wearing a swimsuit that covers her entire body and her hair because she wants to enjoy the beach, but she also wants to abide by her religious obligations. And you've got police officers going to the beach and humiliating that woman and stripping her of her identifying cloth, and then doing that in the name of secularism and modernity and progress. That's the point. We need to accuse our own lenses and our own constructs. And I'll let Muslim women speak for themselves as to why they chose to cover and what they feel about that obligation.
Thank you.
Humility and modesty.
Humility and modesty. A question.
The other thing I'd throw in is, because you can do, and I assume you could do it in other traditions also. Certainly in Judaism, you could, if you wanted to prejudge, you could look on a bus in Israel, and based on the kind of, whether it's woven, whether it's velvet, how big or how small, you could, like people who really know Israeli sociology could actually tell you a lot about a person, right? In other words, and again, it's a prejudgment, but there's head covering, and then it get, like, as we said from the very beginning, it's also sometimes used as a sociological marker.
Right. That's great. Well, speaking of sociological markers, talk about interfaith marriage. What does each religion say about it?
Repeat the question.
Interfaith marriage. What does each religion say or teach about interfaith marriage?
Omar?
I just spoke for like 15 minutes.
Yes. Yeah.
And you guys gave one-word answers. So.
It's a lot harder to say something with just a few words, don't you think? Is the question what our traditions teach about interfaith marriage?
Or just say about
I just want to point out it's not the rabbi who answered a question with a question.
Yes,
I just want to point that out.
I think it's a sense of, my guess is behind the question, having not written it, is this sense of, is it acceptable? Is it okay?
In traditional Jewish law, it's prohibited.
Okay.
In contemporary Jewish practice, there are many rabbis, specifically rabbis of my denomination, who would officiate. You would never find an Orthodox rabbi officiating an interfaith wedding. You would actually, and a conservative, currently the current regulation of the conservative rabbinic organization is that if a conservative rabbi officiates at an interfaith wedding, they're expelled from the organization. So it's a strong traditional prohibition. In the more progressive and liberal denominations, there are plenty of rabbis who do officiate.
I would certainly say that there isn't explicit this is one of those moments where I cannot speak for Christianity.
Right.
I think that in most cases, individual clerics have some flexibility on how they approach this. Most of the time, marriage is considered kind of in that pastoral category. Certainly as Anglicans or as Episcopalians, and I would say probably Orthodox or Romans, it is sacramental. And when a sacramental moment is shared, that is shared among people who believe in that sacramental experience. However, there is flexibility in that. I think it depends on a personal. In our tradition, we are not compelled to marry anybody. I have declined multiple couples just because, God knows they're not supposed to be married.
Wow.
Sorry.
Man.
I know. So,
Okay.
it's different. I mean, I would say that we have a responsibility to baptize someone who wishes to be baptized, that we have a responsibility to bury someone who needs to be buried, that those are responsibilities that we share. But things like marriage is, I think, a reforming of family and starting something new. And I would say most Christian clergy would really want to encourage a Christian identity in that new family. Even if perhaps someone did not come out of a Christian tradition, that would still be very strongly encouraged, for sure.
So within the Muslim community, to the preservation of identity, the Quran was revealed over 23 years. So the way we look, the Quran was not revealed in one shot, but rather between the age of 40 and 63 of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And so it was dealing with evolving context as well. When Muslims were in Mecca, which is the earlier part of the revelation, the first 13 years, there was an absolute prohibition on interfaith marriages. So Muslim men and Muslim women could not marry non-Muslim men or non-Muslim women, and there was also a prohibition on eating meat slaughtered by anyone that was not Muslim. So those are sacrifices, obviously a big part of the Abrahamic story. So the sacrifices of others was not accepted. When the Muslims moved to Medina, when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, moved to Medina, there was a vibrant Jewish community, and actually the first constitution in the world, according to some historians, was the Constitution of Medina. You could actually look it up, where Muslims and Jews agreed upon certain obligations to one another and certain things to each other. At that point, there was a verse that was revealed in the Quran that relaxed the prohibition for men, Muslim men, marrying Jewish or Christian women, and relaxed or did away with the prohibition of eating sacrifice, eating the meat of Christians and Jews. And that was in that new interaction that was taking place. So certainly, even with that relaxation of prohibition on Muslim men being able now to marry Jewish women and Christian women, it still was not encouraged. It was discouraged actually very early on in an effort to preserve the Islamic identity within the marriage. But when it comes to food, thankfully, I can eat kosher. And we got some really good kosher food in Dallas. It's better in New Orleans, where I used to hang out with Rabbi Lowy, but Muslims can eat halal and they can eat kosher, so they can eat meat that's slaughtered by Christians and Jews as well as Muslims. And that got me a little hungry, and we're having dinner after this.
Is there one requirement to be your faith? Is there one requirement? Or can you think of a requirement to be your faith tradition?
Are we doing a conversion right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, in our tradition, it is the testimony of faith, which is La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah, that I bear witness that there is only one God worthy of worship and unconditional obedience, and that Muhammad is his final messenger. And that statement affirms 6 articles of faith, which is belief in one God and monotheism, belief in the messengers and prophets, belief in the scriptures, belief in the angels, belief in the day of judgment, and belief in divine decree and predestination. So those are the 6 pillars of faith that are implied in the statement. But it's fun to make someone think when they're about to become Muslim that we're going to also baptize them, or we've got a pool in the back of the mosque, so their eyes get really wide. And also, when someone becomes Muslim, the way that Muslims celebrate is they say Allahu Akbar. And if you haven't warned the person before they become Muslim that everybody in the mosque is about to chant Allahu Akbar, and they've been watching certain news channels, they get really scared. So that's I always try to make it a point to explain, like, that's how they're going to celebrate. It doesn't mean they're going to kill you. It means they're about to come hug you.
So Christianity is definitely an orthodoxy. So it is grounded in right belief, and the belief being that God's redemptive work in the world was made complete through the incarnation of Christ, and that our move toward redemption and salvation is through the belief in Christ. And the rest of it is details that people need to feel good, but that's the common starting place.
I think Judaism is distinguished here also, tends to put plenty of emphasis on deed as well as on creed. If you wanted to look historically, the Jews are a people before they get to Mount Sinai. So they're actually identified and behaving as a people before they enter into the formal Sinaitic covenant. In general, what you end up with in later rabbinic Judaism is sort of 2 core ideas. What's called Ol HaMalchut and Ol HaMitzvot. Ol HaMalchut is the yoke, Y-O-K-E, of God's sovereignty, and Ol HaMitzvot is the yoke of the commandments. And that one way or another, there has to be participation in the covenant in both of those dimensions. So it is both about accepting a notion of one God in all the world, as well as accepting, in some interpretation, a life of mitzvot, of living according to covenant and commandment.
Can I just share with you the coolest Muslim t-shirt that's out there? There's actually a t-shirt, I cannot be Muslim if I don't believe in Jesus. Wow. It's actually a t-shirt that some people wear, so it's pretty cool.
Wow, that's great. That's great. So another question from our gathering tonight. What is your biggest fear as it relates to your faith in Dallas and worldwide? Wow. Maybe let's focus on Dallas. What is your greatest fear right now and where we are?
Well, we're the only Muslim community in America that regularly has white supremacist groups in front of our mosques with long rifles. That's pretty scary.
That is scary.
And it's routine. It's routine in our community. There's no other. Texas has 10% of the country's hate groups. we have a lot of hate in Texas. We have a lot of hate in Dallas. And we have had a lot of Islamophobia in Dallas. And we have had she turned 8 last week. My 8-year-old daughter, she asked me the question. She said, if Donald Trump becomes president, are we going to be killed? And so what children are ingesting and internalizing, I'd like to think that, and this is, I think, part of all of our faiths, that we should work with optimism. That as a person who believes in God, I can't afford to be pessimistic. We're playing the long game. If we're preaching inclusivity, if we're preaching love and mercy and tolerance and justice and these ideals that for most people, even if they are lived, they are not part of the mission of those people. As people of clergy, of faith, people who believe in God, and people who want to make Dallas a more loving city, we have to be willing, or we have to believe that we're going to give our children a fighting chance to be able to realize that. I don't think that Dr. King really believed that he would achieve everything that he dreamed of in his own lifetime. So for me, this is pretty bad. And with a lot of otherizing, Dr. Greg Robinson, who's the foremost scholar on Japanese internment in the United States, he has a book by order of the president in which he talks about how the Japanese in particular were able to be treated that way as opposed to Europeans that came from countries that were also hostile to the United States. And prevailing racist attitudes allowed for racist policy, allowed for discriminatory policy. What that means is that it was easier to otherize the Japanese Americans than it was the German American or the Italian American or whatever it may be. It was easier to otherize them. So as a Muslim, look, in our situation, it is a statistical fact that Muslims do not commit most acts of terrorism, domestically or globally. It's statistical. You can't argue with it. It's objective research data that Muslims do not kill more than other faith groups and that Muslims do not commit most terrorist acts or mass shootings in the United States. However, the way that a San Bernardino is treated as opposed to a Las Vegas puts us in a situation in which we feel like at times we can't win. Because we have to defend every lunatic that takes 1 life or 16 lives, whereas other groups of people are given a pass even when a person may be claiming their faith or belong to their group and could murder 60 people without anyone facing any repercussions for that. And our children have to bear the burden of that. And if you think about how unjust that is, I wrote an article yesterday that went up on CNN, and it was, I am not your American Muslim. And to be honest with you, I started off with the last detainee at the airport in DFW was Jesus. His name was Jesus. He was a 33-year-old Iraqi man who served the US military and was named Isa, which means Jesus, and had a broken pelvis because of an attack that he suffered from serving the United States Army. And we held him at DFW, and he almost died out of pain back there because of the Muslim ban 1 year ago. What does that say about our Christianity? What does it say about our patriotism? What does that say about everything that we claim to hold near and dear? And so it's a losing battle if, in order for a Muslim to be dignified, they have to be American with a capital A patriot with a capital P, a Democrat with a capital D, or a Republican with a capital R. We're just not willing to live up to those standards, because you don't have to like me, but you have to respect me. You could hate the Quran, but you've got to treat me in accordance with the Constitution. And so we will insist on our rights, and I pray that we're able to form. I am optimistic because I do think that we're forming coalitions now that we would not have formed in our complacency, that we would not have formed if the myth of a post-racial America continued to persist in the media. And that idea that we've moved beyond all of our rifts and discrimination was able to survive. So I think now it's code red, it's raised, we're alert, and hopefully that radical hatred is forcing radical love. And so I'm optimistic that we'll form coalitions and friendships and relationships that hopefully will give our children a better chance to do away with those divisions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Here in Dallas, I think that the most dangerous thing for us is that this is a segregated city. I've lived in 5 major cities, and I've not lived in a place that is so separated. And I think the separation is maybe not bad for the reason you might think. It's exposure, and it's simply just knowing other people. It is so easy for me in my world of work and school and grocery stores and whatever to really only see people who look like me and who might believe like me. Way too easy. And when that is the case, then the natural exposure that we have to people who just aren't like us is so low that we can't otherwise. And in places where segregation, where there is a big mix, you kind of have to learn about other people just because they're around you, right? You're working with them, you're shopping with them, you're in school with them, and you figure out that they're just people. And that I think for Dallas is probably the biggest hurdle that we have, because geography and physical division is really difficult to get over, really difficult. Nationally, perhaps, I think that there is no way to read the story of Christ as a story that is not about incredible, lavish abundance, always. And yet, I think that especially Christian groups have not been living abundantly for a while. And when we guard ourselves and are concerned about lack and try to shore up what we have to not lose any of it, we're not actually living faithfully. And that kind of, the abundance of God is so tangible and real that if we don't claim that back, that confidence and that courage and that love that abundance provides and empowers us to be, we're not going to grow. We're not going to be a force for good. We're not going to be able to claim our authority for the good that God calls us to be in the world. And I think that Christian groups, particularly in America, have that reckoning that is coming a lot faster than we wish it were.
I have a few worries. First is I sort of believe that anti-Semitism is a constant. I believe that in some periods and places it's more submerged, which I'm very happy for. And I'm really not a sort of, anti-Semitism is not a primary shaper of my Jewish identity. It is for lots of Jews. It's not a primary shaper of my, and I say that without judgment. It's not a primary shaper of my identity, but I have an awareness of it. I have a sense of vigilance about it. I think that we've been relatively fortunate in Dallas, but I sort of don't really take it for granted. And it may sound paradoxical, but the other thing I'm worried about in the sociological category is assimilation. That Jewish achievement and Jewish integration get so cushy that we lose track of who we are. As a faith community, as an historic community, as a distinguished and distinctive community. So I worry about that, and I see that as a big part of my responsibility. And I'm now shifting away from the sociological towards the more explicitly faith dimension of Jewish identity. I worry about complacency. I worry that we'll take all the parts that are warm and joyous and connective and self-affirming, which, thank God, there are deep reservoirs of, and neglect our obligation to justice, neglect our obligation to enter into the spaces that are uncomfortable, neglect our obligation to hear the stories that are uncomfortable, neglect our obligation to see what's broken and to work to be healers of that breach. So I worry that we don't rise to the level to which our tradition calls us.
Thank you.
Can I respond for maybe just faith communities in general?
Sure.
I think assimilation is an interesting idea to put forward because one of the things, I grew up in Florida, which a lot of people call, the 6th borough of New York, and I had...
We call it God's anteroom.
God's anteroom? That is not wrong. So we used to have bumper stickers that said, "When I am old, I will move to Michigan and drive slow." So point being, though, when I grew up, I had lots of Jewish friends, and every Saturday morning they would trot off to Jew school, right? And they would learn how to speak and read Hebrew. They would learn stories. Friends of mine who were raised in Jewish families did not make the assumption that they would figure out how to be Jewish unless they were taught by their church, right? By the synagogue or their school or their community center. And I think that one of the differences that Christian groups have to embrace is our culture is not Christian, right? It is, nominally there's some words that perhaps culture uses that have Christian roots, but America was founded to be this place of diversity, right? And of equality. And we have slowly, almost so slowly that we don't even like to admit it, become a place where we still think that people might become Christian just by osmosis of being in America. Not true. And it has not been true. And it's really basically not been true for any person in this room, right? It has many generations of not being true. And most Christian groups have yet to cop to that untruth. And we do not take seriously enough forming people to be Christian in the way that I think my friends up here, their traditions don't make that assumption, because nobody thinks that just by being in America, you're going to learn how to be a good Muslim, right? Everyone would say, no. And so we go to a place where that tradition is passed on and taught and honored and respected in the same way that anyone who is Jewish does that. And Christians have got to own that more. And that's a danger, because I think as people of faith, all of us will lose if we don't realize the necessity of formation and we just assume it will happen.
Thank you. So believe it or not, gentlemen, it's after 8:30. I know, Zoom whoosh, there goes. So I can't help but end on a wonderful question. I don't know who wrote it. It's kind of a circle back to when we all got together before we came in here. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to upset. The questions tonight have been fabulous. There are many, many others that I'm sure we're going to figure out a way to address in communication from this evening. But here's the last question. And I did not write it, see? What is the best priest, rabbi, and imam walk into a bar joke that you know? I should qualify, that can be shared in a mixed room. That can be shared
in this room, in this sacred space.
So I told them this earlier. I actually, when I pulled into to the parking lot tonight, I Googled a rabbi, a priest, and an imam walk in a bar. Just because I figured you have to know one of them, right? And I didn't know any of them. And so here's what came up, right? A rabbi, a priest, and an imam walk into a bar. And the bartender looks at them and says, What is this, a joke? That's it.
Well, there you go.
There you go.
That's a good one.
Go ahead.
I don't have any.
You got nothing.
I got nothing.
Wow. I have absolutely nothing. So I would think that it would be something about, something about the Muslim being violent, the imam hitting someone over the head with a bottle. I would think it'd be like something like that, right?
Are you sure you don't have one, David, now?
So, yeah, I mean, it's going to be one of the stereotypes, right? So,
Right.
But I'm pretty sure it ends with the imam being violent. I mean, it's just got to be that way. So the imam's either going to break the bottle on the bartender's head or the priest is going to get it. So.
And yet, I think we would all agree that often the better conversations for understanding are going to happen in the bars and the restrooms or around dinner tables than they are going to be in our segregated places of worship on the weekends. And so maybe that can be the great takeaway, is to find ways in our communities to come together around tables, around places where we can engage in conversation and laughter and
I don't
laugh
drink
at one another. Did you want to say?
Honestly, I was just going to say I don't drink, but I'll say this, that David has become my favorite coffee partner.
There you go,
very
coffee
quickly.
shops.
So we've done Java Me Up, and that's
Excellent.
the best we've done, and I've got to bring you out there as well. So.
I love coffee.
All right. We have more in common than you think.
That's right. So real quickly, just to end us, I want to say a big word of thanks to Amy for moderating us tonight.
Well, and for all the questions. Thank you.
For David and for Omar for being here with us tonight. And a thank you to all of you, for the women of St. Michael, for everyone who helped put this together. St. Michael is really honored that you were here with us tonight in this sacred space for a sacred conversation. And we hope that it does not end here for you, that perhaps you will stay after for the reception that will be out these doors in our garden cloister, our parlor, and all over the place. Stay and have conversation. Look around the church and see somebody you don't know and go meet them and go ask them who they are and why are they here, first of all. What do they believe? And maybe make a new friend. And perhaps we will all continue this dialogue for good that will begin to change our city and our world. So thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.
I hope the joke didn't go. It was good.
Thank you.